The desert did not forgive that day. The desert was merciless. Blood dripped onto weathered wooden floorboards, dark and thick, forming a small pool that reflected the flickering oil lamp. The cabin smelled of iron, sweat, and fear, a scent as old as time itself. Ezra Coleman worked with steady hands, his weathered face illuminated by the lamp's amber glow. Sweat beaded on his forehead as he extracted a bullet from the unconscious young woman sprawled across his kitchen table. His fingers moved with practiced precision, despite years of disuse. The girl's skin was pale, her breathing shallow, too young to die in this forgotten corner of New Mexico. "They're coming," Mackenzie Wells said, her voice tight with tension. She stood by the window, Winchester rifle gripped in white-knuckled hands, her eyes never leaving the darkness beyond the glass. A fresh wound marked her right cheek, still seeping blood she hadn't bothered to wipe away. "How much longer?" "You can't rush this," Ezra replied, not looking up. The bullet had gone deep, dangerously close to the artery. One wrong move and the girl would bleed out in minutes. "You lied to me, Miss Wells. What else haven't you told me?" Moonlight caught in Mackenzie's red-brown hair as she turned slightly, her green eyes meeting his for just a moment. "Everything, but now isn't the time." The sound of distant hoofbeats echoed through the night air. Both froze, exchanging a look that spoke volumes. Death was approaching, carried on horseback across the desert. Mackenzie tightened her grip on the rifle. "If we die tonight, I want you to know." "Save it," Ezra cut her off, returning to his work. "No one's dying in my house tonight." But even as he spoke the words, he knew they might be a lie. The desert took what it wanted, and it had always been thirsty for blood. 2 weeks earlier, Sweetwater, New Mexico was just another frontier town being transformed by the railroad's iron grip. The Red Stallion Saloon pulsed with life, the only real heartbeat in a town still finding its rhythm. Piano music battled with raucous laughter and the clink of glasses, while cigarette smoke hung thick as storm clouds in the air. Mackenzie Wells moved between tables with practiced grace, balancing whiskey glasses on a small tray. Her simple blue dress was modest compared to the other girls, her movements efficient rather than seductive. At 27, she'd learned how to navigate these waters without becoming prey. Men's hands reached for her, but never quite connected. She was quicksilver, there and gone before fingers could grasp. Near the battered upright piano in the corner, Abigail played a melancholy tune, her slender fingers drawing emotion from worn ivory keys. Just 18, with dark curls framing a delicate face and skin a shade darker than most in the saloon would accept, she kept her eyes on the keys, never making eye contact with the patrons who watched her too intently. "Another round for Mr. Hargrove's table," Maxwell, the bartender, called out, sliding 3 glasses of top-shelf whiskey onto Mackenzie's tray. "And don't spill it this time. That's the good stuff." Mackenzie didn't respond to the barb, her attention caught by the man sitting in the shadowed corner. Victor Hargrove didn't need to raise his voice to command attention. At 52, his silver hair was impeccably groomed, his black vest and jacket tailored perfectly to his broad frame. He wore black leather gloves despite the heat, and a long scar ran down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. His eyes, cold and calculating, followed Abigail's movements. Mackenzie approached his table, setting down the drinks with steady hands. "Your whiskey, Mr. Hargrove." Mr. Hargrove didn't acknowledge her, his gaze still fixed on Abigail. He took a long drag from an expensive cigar, exhaling a cloud of blue-gray smoke. "That girl," he finally said, his voice cultured, controlled. "The piano player. I've been watching her." Something cold settled in Mackenzie's stomach. "She's just a girl, sir, and she's spoken for." This drew his attention. His eyes shifted to her, taking in the simple silver necklace with its small locket that hung at her throat. "Is that so, Miss Wells? And who might have claim on her?" "The owner. She's—" Mackenzie hesitated. "She's his investment. Brings in customers with her playing." Hargrove's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Everything has a price in this world, Miss Wells. I've yet to find something that can't be bought." He placed a leather-gloved hand on her arm, the pressure just tight enough to be a warning. "Tell your employer I'd like a word. Tonight." After her shift ended, Mackenzie lingered near the back office, pretending to organize glasses while straining to hear the conversation within. The saloon owner's voice rose and fell, alternating between obsequious and fearful. Hargrove's responses were too low to make out, but the tone was unmistakable. a man used to getting his way. When the door opened, Mackenzie moved quickly to the bar, keeping her back turned. She heard Hargrove's measured footsteps cross the floor, followed by the soft sound of the front door closing behind him. The owner, Frank Mercer, emerged from the office looking pale. His eyes found Mackenzie. "You, get the girl. Pack her things. She's leaving tonight." Mackenzie's heart hammered against her ribs. "What do you mean leaving? Where's she going?" "She's been sold. Debt payment." Mercer wouldn't meet her eyes. "Hargrove's men will collect her at midnight." "She's not cattle, Frank. She's a person." "She's property," Mercer snapped, his face flushing. "My property and now his. That's how it works out here. You know that better than most." His eyes narrowed. "Unless you'd prefer to take her place. Hargrove might be amenable to a trade." The thought sent ice through her veins, but Mackenzie kept her expression neutral. "I'll get her ready." Instead, she grabbed Abigail from the small room they shared above the saloon, stuffed a few essentials into a bag, and led her to the stables behind the saloon. The night watchman lay slumped against a post, a bottle of drugged whiskey beside him, Mackenzie's insurance policy. "What's happening?" Abigail whispered, trembling in the cool night air. "Why are we running?" "Hargrove," was all Mackenzie said as she saddled two horses. "He bought you from Mercer." Understanding dawned in Abigail's eyes, followed by naked fear. "The mine owner? The one they call the Silver Baron?" Her voice cracked. "The girls talk about him. They say no one ever comes back from his estate. That's why we're leaving." Mackenzie helped her onto the horse. "Head east. I'll be right behind you." As they rode away from Sweetwater, Mackenzie's hand briefly touched the hidden treasure against her collarbone. Not a portrait or lover's memento hung there, but something far more dangerous. A small key that could topple Hargrove's empire. A secret worth killing for. She just hoped they could reach safety before Hargrove realized what she'd taken. The desert sun showed no mercy. By midday, it had become a relentless hammer, beating down on the two women as they pushed their exhausted horses across the unforgiving terrain. Heat rippled from the sand and waves, distorting the horizon into a shimmering mirage. "We need to find water soon," Mackenzie said, her lips cracked and voice hoarse. "The horses won't last much longer." Abigail nodded weakly, her face flushed with heat. They had been riding for nearly 2 days, stopping only for brief rests. The vast emptiness of the New Mexico desert stretched around them, broken occasionally by jutting rock formations and sparse, stubborn vegetation. Mackenzie scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of water or shelter. In the distance, a plume of dust caught her eye. Riders moving fast. "Down," she hissed, guiding her horse behind a rocky outcropping. "Someone's coming." They dismounted, crouching low. Mackenzie drew a small revolver from her saddlebag, checking that it was loaded. The dust cloud grew larger, revealing 3 riders pushing their horses hard. "Hargrove's men?" Abigail whispered. Mackenzie nodded grimly. "He's not a man who accepts loss." She handed Abigail the reins of both horses. "If they find us, you run. Don't stop for anything." The riders drew closer, and Mackenzie caught a glimpse of the lead man, a tall figure with a distinctive red bandana. Jenkins, Hargrove's head of security. The man who did the dirty work his employer wouldn't soil his gloves with. For a moment, it seemed they would pass by without noticing the women's hiding place. Then Mackenzie's horse nickered, a soft sound, but in the desert stillness, it carried. The rider stopped. Jenkins raised his hand, scanning the rocks. "We know you're there, Wells," he called out. "You took something that doesn't belong to you. 2 things, actually." His laugh was ugly. "Make this easy on yourself." Mackenzie signaled to Abigail to stay down, then fired a warning shot that kicked up dust near the men's horses. It was enough to startle the animals, sending them into a brief panic. In the confusion, she grabbed Abigail. "Now, ride!" They mounted quickly, spurring their exhausted horses into a gallop. The thunder of hooves filled the air as they broke cover, racing across the open desert with Hargrove's men in pursuit. The crack of gunfire split the air. Abigail's scream came a moment later as she lurched forward in her saddle, clutching her shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining her dress crimson. "Abigail!" Mackenzie pulled her horse alongside the girls. "Hold on!" Another shot rang out, this one striking Abigail's horse. The animal screamed, stumbling and collapsing, sending Abigail tumbling to the ground in a cloud of dust. Mackenzie reined in hard, jumping from her saddle and running back to the fallen girl. "Go," Abigail gasped, her face contorted with pain. "Leave me." Not a chance, Mackenzie fired twice more at their pursuers, forcing them to scatter. She helped Abigail to her feet, half carrying her to the remaining horse. With strength born of desperation, she lifted the girl onto the saddle, then mounted behind her. Their horse, already exhausted, struggled under the double burden. Mackenzie knew they couldn't outrun the men much longer. She veered toward a narrow canyon, hoping the confined space would make it harder for their pursuers to shoot without risking ricochets. The gamble paid off. The men followed but held their fire. The canyon walls provided momentary shelter, but Mackenzie knew it wouldn't last. When the passage widened again, she urged the horse off the trail into a rocky labyrinth that rose from the desert floor like ancient giants. By dusk, they had lost their pursuers, but Abigail's condition was worsening. The bullet remained lodged in her shoulder, and infection was setting in. Their horse had collapsed, unable to carry them further. Mackenzie fashioned a makeshift travois from branches and her shawl, dragging Abigail across the desert as night fell. Under the cold desert stars, Mackenzie Wells faced the possibility that they would both die out here, that she had failed to save either of them. She touched the silver locket at her throat, feeling the key inside. So many had died for this small piece of metal. And for what? Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a pinprick of light appeared on the horizon, warm and steady, not the cold twinkle of stars. A lamp, a house, hope, like the faintest whisper of a prayer, stirred in her chest. Ezra Coleman's world had shrunk to the boundaries of his small ranch. 10 acres of mostly unforgiving land, a modest cabin, a barn that leaned slightly to the east, a corral with a single aging horse, and a small garden where he coaxed herbs and vegetables from the reluctant soil. It was enough, more than enough for a man who had seen too much of the wider world. Each day followed the same rhythm, tending the garden at dawn, repairing whatever needed fixing during the day, reading by lamplight in the evening. Simple, predictable, safe. Until the night a sharp knock broke the silence. Ezra set down his book, reaching automatically for the revolver he kept on the side table. Few people knew of his isolated home, and fewer still had reason to visit, especially after dark. The knocking came again, more urgent. "Please," a woman's voice called, strained and desperate. "We need help. She's been shot." Ezra approached the door cautiously, gun ready. Through the window, he caught a glimpse of a woman supporting another who hung limply in her arms, both covered in dust and blood. He opened the door, keeping the revolver visible. "Who are you?" The standing woman, tall with red-brown hair escaping from a once neat bun, met his gaze without flinching. "My name is Mackenzie Wells. This is Abigail. She's been shot. She needs a doctor." Her green eyes took in the gun, then returned to his face. "Please, she's dying." Ezra studied them. The younger woman was barely conscious, her dark curls matted with sweat, skin ashen beneath its natural tan. A blood-stained bandage covered her shoulder. The older woman, Mackenzie, stood with the stiff determination of someone running on nothing but willpower. Both looked like they'd crossed hell to get here. "I'm not a doctor," he said finally. "You're all we've got," she replied, a hint of steel beneath the exhaustion. Ezra hesitated only a moment longer before lowering his gun and stepping aside. "Bring her in. Put her on the table." As Mackenzie carried Abigail inside, Ezra moved quickly around the cabin, gathering clean cloths, a basin of water, and a wooden box from beneath his bed. When he returned, Mackenzie had laid Abigail on the kitchen table and was pressing a cloth to her wound. "How long since she was shot?" Ezra asked, rolling up his sleeves. The movement revealed a patchwork of old scars across his forearms. "Almost 2 days." Mackenzie's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "The bullet's still in there. I couldn't get it out." Ezra opened the wooden box, revealing an assortment of surgical instruments, neatly arranged and well-maintained despite obvious age. He selected a pair of forceps and a scalpel, then reached for a brown bottle of clear liquid. Mackenzie watched him with narrowing eyes. "You said you weren't a doctor." "I'm not. Not anymore." Ezra poured some of the liquid onto a cloth and handed it to her. "Hold this over her nose and mouth. It's ether. It will keep her unconscious while I work." As Mackenzie administered the ether, Ezra examined the wound. The bullet had entered just below Abigail's collarbone, missing the major arteries but embedding deep in the muscle. Infection had already set in, evidenced by the angry red streaks radiating from the entry point. "Who shot her?" he asked as he cleaned around the wound. "Hargrove's men, from Sweetwater." Ezra's hands paused momentarily. "Victor Hargrove? The mine owner? You know him?" "I know of him." Ezra's voice was carefully neutral as he returned to his work. "Few don't in these parts. What did you do to earn his attention?" "We existed," Mackenzie replied bitterly. "That's enough for men like him." Ezra made the first incision, widening the entry wound to access the bullet. Abigail moaned softly despite the ether, her body tensing. "Hold her still," he instructed. Mackenzie complied, her eyes never leaving Ezra's face. "You move like a surgeon." War teaches many skills. He worked methodically, probing for the bullet with the forceps. None of them pleasant. "Which side?" His blue-gray eyes flicked up to meet hers. "Does it matter anymore?" Before she could answer, the forceps connected with metal. Carefully, Ezra extracted the misshapen bullet, dropping it into a bowl with a soft clink. He then cleaned the wound thoroughly, packed it with a poultice of herbs from his garden, and bandaged it. "She'll need time to heal," he said, washing blood from his hands in a basin. "And prayer wouldn't hurt. Infection's the real danger now." Mackenzie sagged visibly, the last of her strength ebbing now that Abigail was being cared for. "Thank you," she whispered. Ezra studied her, the exhaustion, the fear, the fierce protectiveness, and something else, something haunted. He recognized it because he saw the same look in his own mirror every morning. "You can stay until she's well enough to travel," he said finally. "There's a spare room, but I want the truth, all of it. Why Hargrove's hunting you and what you're carrying, that's worth killing for." Mackenzie's hand moved unconsciously to the silver locket at her throat. "How did you... People don't cross the desert on foot, dragging a wounded girl, unless they're running from something worse than death." Ezra gathered his instruments, returning them to the wooden box. "Rest tonight. We'll talk tomorrow." As Mackenzie carried Abigail to the small bedroom, Ezra remained in the kitchen, turning the extracted bullet in his fingers. It had been years since he'd performed surgery, years since he'd allowed himself to care whether someone lived or died. He'd made a promise after the war, after Claire and Samuel. No more. Yet here he was, blood on his hands again. Different circumstances, same result. Outside, an owl called into the night. Ezra moved to the window, scanning the darkness beyond his small homestead. Somewhere out there, Hargrove's men were still searching. They would find this place eventually. They always did. He touched the scar on his neck, a silent reminder of promises broken and debts unpaid. Perhaps it was time to settle accounts. Dawn broke over the desert in a spectacular display of color, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ezra stood on the porch of his cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching the transformation. No matter how many sunrises he witnessed, the beauty of it still caught him by surprise. A small miracle in a world that often seemed devoid of them. The sound of footsteps behind him broke his reverie. Mackenzie Wells emerged from the cabin, looking somewhat restored after a night's rest. She'd washed the dust from her face and hair, revealing freckles across the bridge of her nose and a small scar on her chin. "How is she?" Ezra asked, offering his coffee. Mackenzie accepted the mug gratefully. "Fever's down, she's sleeping peacefully." She took a sip, her eyes scanning the horizon. "Thank you for helping us." Ezra nodded, returning his gaze to the sunrise. "You're good with her, like a sister." "Not blood, but yes, like a sister." Mackenzie's voice softened. "She deserves better than the hand she's been dealt." "Don't we all?" It wasn't a question. They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher. Then Ezra turned to her, his expression serious. "You promised me the truth." Mackenzie sighed, handing back the coffee. "Some truths are dangerous, Mr. Coleman. So is harboring fugitives from Victor Hargrove." His tone was matter-of-fact. "I've earned the risk." She studied him for a long moment, weighing her options. Finally, she nodded. Abigail worked at the Red Stallion playing piano. Hargrove saw her, wanted her. The owner owed him money, so he offered Abigail as payment. "And you objected, wouldn't you?" A flash of anger crossed her mind. She's 18, barely more than a child. The things he would have done to her. She shuddered. I've heard stories about his preferences. I couldn't let that happen. So you stole her away, Ezra concluded. But that's not all you took, is it? His eyes dropped to the silver locket at her throat. Mackenzie's hand moved to cover it protectively. That's my business. It became my business when you brought Hargrove's wrath to my doorstep. Ezra's voice remained calm, but there was an edge to it now. What's in the locket, Miss Wells? What's worth dying for and killing for? Before she could answer, a weak voice called from inside the cabin. Mackenzie? Mackenzie turned immediately, hurrying back inside. Ezra followed more slowly, giving her a moment with Abigail before he entered the small bedroom. Abigail lay propped against pillows, her dark curls framing a face still pale but more alert than the previous night. The resemblance to someone from Ezra's past was so striking that, for a moment, he had to look away. You must be the angel Max says saved my life, Abigail said, her voice soft but steady. No angel, Ezra replied gruffly, just in the right place. He moved to check her wound, his touch clinical but gentle. The fever's breaking. That's good. You're fighting it. She's always been a fighter, Mackenzie said, smoothing Abigail's hair back from her forehead. Too stubborn to die in the desert. Abigail managed a weak smile. Learned from the best. Her eyes, dark and intelligent, studied Ezra. You were a doctor in the war, weren't you? Max said you moved like a surgeon. Ezra's expression remained neutral as he rebandaged the wound. I did what was needed, like most men. Which side? Abigail asked innocently. Mackenzie shot her a warning look, but Ezra answered calmly. The side that was losing. He stood, gathering the used bandages. Rest, your body needs to heal. As he left the room, he heard Abigail whisper, He's not what I expected. Mackenzie's reply was too soft to catch, but her tone was cautious. Smart woman. Trust came too easily to some people, a luxury neither of them could afford. In the kitchen, Ezra disposed of the soiled bandages and washed his hands thoroughly. His reflection in the small mirror above the basin looked older than his 46 years. Lines etched deep around eyes that had seen too much. The scar on his neck, a long, jagged line that disappeared beneath his collar, stood out starkly against his tan skin, a reminder of what happened when you trusted the wrong people. He glanced at the closed door of the spare bedroom, where Mackenzie and Abigail whispered together. Two women on the run, one carrying something Hargrove wanted badly enough to chase across the desert. And now they were in his home, bringing all their troubles with them. Ezra should send them away as soon as the girl could travel. That would be the sensible thing, the safe thing. But as he dried his hands, his eyes fell on a small framed photograph lying face down on the mantel. He never looked at it anymore, couldn't bear to see the smiling faces of Claire and Samuel, forever frozen in a moment before everything fell apart. But he kept it there, a daily penance. Some debts could never be repaid, some sins never absolved. But perhaps, in helping these women, he could balance the scales just a little. Outside, his old horse nickered softly from the corral, drawing Ezra's attention. The animal stood alert, ears pricked forward toward the eastern horizon. Ezra stepped onto the porch, scanning the distance. Nothing moved in the shimmering heat, but years of battlefield experience had taught him to trust the instincts of animals over his own eyes. Someone was coming. He returned inside, retrieving his rifle from its place beside the door. We may have company, he announced, entering the bedroom. How well did you cover your tracks yesterday? Alarm flashed across Mackenzie's face. We were careful, but, she glanced at Abigail, we were desperate. Then we prepare. Ezra checked the rifle's action, the familiar motion coming back to him like breathing. Can you shoot? Mackenzie nodded. Not well, but yes. Better than not at all. He handed her a revolver from his belt. Stay with her. If anyone but me tries to enter this room, shoot them. His voice was calm, matter-of-fact. I'll check the perimeter. Outside, the desert sun beat down mercilessly, turning the world into a furnace. Ezra circled his property cautiously, rifle ready, scanning for signs of intrusion. The horse remained agitated, pacing its small corral. Near the eastern edge of his land, Ezra found what he was looking for. Hoof prints, not yet erased by the wind. 4 horses moving slowly, deliberately, scouts most likely, searching methodically. They'd been here within the last hour. Hargrove's men were close, too close. As Ezra hurried back to the cabin, a glint of metal caught his eye, a reflection from the ridge overlooking his property. He dove instinctively as a rifle crack split the air, the bullet throwing up dirt where he'd stood a moment before. Rolling behind a water trough, Ezra returned fire, aiming for the flash he'd seen on the ridge. Another shot answered his, splintering wood inches from his head. Whoever was up there knew their business. Staying low, Ezra made his way back to the cabin in a series of short dashes, using what little cover the sparse landscape provided. As he reached the porch, the door opened, revealing Mackenzie with the revolver raised. "Get down!" Ezra shouted, tackling her as another shot rang out, the bullet embedding itself in the doorframe. They crashed to the floor inside, Ezra kicking the door shut behind them. Mackenzie struggled beneath him, her breath coming in short gasps. "Sniper on the ridge," Ezra explained, rolling off her. "One, maybe two." "Hargrove's men?" Her voice was steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Who else?" Ezra moved to the window, keeping to the side as he peered out. "They're watching the cabin, waiting for reinforcements probably." "What do we do?" Ezra's mind raced through options, few of them good. "There's a cellar, trapdoor under the rug in the main room. It's small, but it will hide you and Abigail. And you? I'll lead them away from the house." Ezra moved to a cabinet, retrieving more ammunition. "Make them think you've already gone." Mackenzie shook her head. "They'll kill you." "Maybe." Ezra checked his rifle methodically. "Maybe not." "Why would you do that for us? You don't even know us." Ezra paused, his eyes meeting hers. In them, Mackenzie saw something unexpected. Not fear, not resignation, but a quiet determination. The look of a man who had made peace with his choices. "Because 20 years ago, I didn't open my door to someone who needed help," he said softly. "And I've lived with that every day since." He turned away, continuing his preparations. "Get Abigail to the cellar. Don't come out until I return, or until 3 days have passed. And if you don't return, then head north. There's a town called Copper Ridge, about 2 days' ride. Ask for Isaiah Washington. Tell him Ezra Coleman sent you." He handed her a small pouch of coins. "This should get you there." Mackenzie took the pouch, her expression troubled. "You're a good man, Mr. Coleman." A humorless smile touched Ezra's lips. "No, Miss Wells, I'm really not." He moved to the door, checking outside once more. "But I'm trying to become one. Now go." As Mackenzie helped Abigail to the hidden cellar, Ezra slipped out the back of the cabin. The desert heat hit him like a physical blow after the relative cool of the house. He moved quickly, staying low, making his way to the small stable where his horse waited. The animal sensed his urgency, ears flicking nervously as Ezra saddled him. "One more ride, old friend," he murmured, patting the horse's neck. "For old time's sake." Mounting up, Ezra took a deep breath, steadying himself. It had been years since he'd faced men who wanted to kill him. Years since he'd been willing to die for something that mattered. With a soft click of his tongue, he urged the horse forward, away from the cabin and toward the open desert. As he'd hoped, but a shot rang out from the ridge, followed quickly by hoofbeats as the scouts gave chase. Ezra smiled grimly, spurring his horse faster. The game was on, and he was playing for time. Time for two women he barely knew, running from a man whose evil he understood all too well. Sometimes redemption came in unexpected forms. Night had fallen by the time Ezra returned to the cabin, his horse lathered with sweat and his own clothes caked with dust. He'd led Hargrove's men on a wild chase through the desert, losing them in a maze of canyons before doubling back. The old cavalry tactics had served him well, though his body protested the abuse after years of quiet ranching. The cabin stood dark and silent, just as he'd left it. Ezra approached cautiously, alert for any sign of ambush. Finding none, he entered, lighting a lamp with hands that trembled slightly from exhaustion. "Miss Wells?" he called softly. "It's Ezra Coleman. It's safe to come out." The trap door in the main room lifted slowly, Mackenzie's face appearing in the opening, revolver still in hand. Relief washed over her features when she saw him. "You made it back." "Told you I would." Ezra set the lamp down, sinking into a chair. "They're gone for now. Lost them in the canyons to the west." Mackenzie emerged fully from the cellar, helping Abigail up after her. The younger woman looked pale but determined, her arm in a makeshift sling. "We heard shots," she said. "We thought—" "Not mine," Ezra assured her. "They're not good at conserving ammunition." Wasted most of it scaring rabbits. He stood, moving to check Abigail's wound. How's the shoulder? Hurts, she admitted. But I'll live, thanks to you. Ezra nodded, satisfied with what he saw. The bleeding stopped. Keep it clean, and you should heal without complications. As Abigail settled onto the small sofa, Mackenzie approached Ezra, her voice low. They'll be back, won't they? Yes, he saw no point in lying. Hargrove's not a man who gives up easily, especially when it comes to things he considers his property. His eyes fell to the silver locket again. You still haven't told me what's in there. Mackenzie hesitated, her hand moving to the locket. After a long moment, she unclasped it, opening the small silver case to reveal a tiny key. This opens a safe in Hargrove's office, a safe containing documents that could destroy him, proof of murder, corruption, land theft. And you stole it. Yes. No apology in her voice, no regret. I worked as a dancer at one of his saloons. I overheard things, saw things. When I realized what he was planning for Abigail, she glanced at the girl, lowering her voice further. I had to act. The key was opportunity. You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Wells. Life is dangerous, Mr. Coleman, especially for women like us. She closed the locket, the tiny click, somehow final. At least this way, we have a chance. Ezra studied her, the determination in her green eyes, the set of her jaw. A woman who had seen the worst of humanity and still chose to fight. It reminded him of Claire, in ways too painful to examine closely. Get some rest, he said finally. Both of you. We'll talk more in the morning. Later, as the women slept, Ezra sat on his porch, rifle across his knees. The desert night was cool and clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. In the distance, a coyote called, the sound echoing off canyon walls. From his shirt pocket, Ezra withdrew a small, worn photograph. Claire and Samuel, smiling on their last good day together, before the fever took them, before his world collapsed. I don't know if this is right, he whispered to the faded images. Helping them, fighting again, but it feels like something you would have wanted me to do. The stars offered no answer, but as Ezra tucked the photograph away, a strange sense of peace settled over him. For the first time in years, he had acted instead of hiding, had helped instead of turning away. It wasn't redemption, nothing so grand, but perhaps it was a step towards something like forgiveness. The desert night wrapped around him like a blanket, and Ezra Coleman stood guard, watching over two souls who had, for better or worse, become his responsibility. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For tonight, they were safe, and that was enough. A week passed at the Coleman Ranch with the rhythm of healing. Each morning brought small victories. Abigail's fever receding further, her strength returning in increments measured by longer walks and brighter smiles. The bullet wound, cleaned daily by Ezra's careful hands, began to close, angry red giving way to the pink of new skin. For Mackenzie, the respite was both blessing and torment. Safety, even temporary, felt foreign after weeks of constant vigilance. Yet each passing day brought the certainty that Hargrove was drawing his net tighter, searching for the women who had dared to defy him, and for the key that could destroy everything he'd built. Ezra Coleman remained a puzzle she couldn't quite solve. The man moved with the precision of someone trained in medicine, yet carried himself with a soldier's vigilance. His hands, gentle when tending Abigail's wound, bore the calluses of hard labor and old scars that spoke of violence. He shared his home and provisions without complaint, yet kept parts of himself locked away as securely as the room he never opened. On the seventh morning, Mackenzie found him in the garden, methodically harvesting herbs in the cool dawn light. His movements were economical, practiced, a man who had learned to find peace in routine. The way you tend those plants, she observed. It's the same way you treated Abigail's wound. Ezra glanced up, a hint of surprise crossing his weathered features. Few people managed to approach without his noticing. Plants are more forgiving patients, he replied, returning to his work. They don't ask questions. Mackenzie smiled despite herself. Unlike me. Unlike you. A pause as he carefully cut a sprig of rosemary. How is she this morning? Better, she wants to help with chores, says she's tired of being useless. Ezra nodded, unsurprised. Healing isn't just physical. The mind needs purpose. He straightened, wincing slightly as he stretched his back. She could help with the garden. Nothing strenuous. I'll tell her. Mackenzie hesitated, then asked the question that had been troubling her. Have you seen any sign of them? Ezra's expression remained neutral, but his eyes scanned the horizon automatically. No, but that doesn't mean they're not looking. He gathered his harvest into a small basket. Hargrove has resources, men, time, and a reputation for never forgetting a slight. Mackenzie's hand moved unconsciously to the locket at her throat. Ezra noticed the gesture. You should consider your next move, Miss Wells. You can't stay here indefinitely. I know. She sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I'm just not sure where to go. Hargrove has connections throughout the territory. His reach is extensive. There are places beyond his reach. Ezra picked up his basket, moving toward the cabin. The question is whether you're willing to go that far. Before Mackenzie could respond, the sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the morning stillness. Ezra reacted instantly, pushing her toward the cabin. Inside. Now. Mackenzie didn't argue, hurrying to warn Abigail while Ezra retrieved his rifle from beside the door. By the time the rider appeared over the rise, all three were inside. Mackenzie and Abigail hidden in the back room, Ezra positioned by the window with a clear line of sight. The rider approached slowly, a single figure on a dappled gray horse. Not the headlong rush of Hargrove's men, but the measured pace of someone who knew the land and respected it. As the horse drew closer, Ezra's posture changed, tension easing from his shoulders. Isaiah, he murmured, lowering his rifle. The rider dismounted with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in the saddle despite his years. Tall and powerfully built, with close-cropped gray hair and a beard shot through with silver, Isaiah Washington had the bearing of a man who had survived more than his share of life's brutality and emerged with his dignity intact. He secured his horse to the hitching post, dark eyes scanning the property with the alertness of a former soldier. Coleman, he called, his deep voice carrying easily. I know you're watching, it's just me. Ezra opened the door, stepping onto the porch. Unexpected visit, old friend. Isaiah's expression remained serious. Not a social call. He approached, lowering his voice. Storm's coming, Lieutenant. I'm not an officer anymore, Isaiah. Ezra glanced toward the cabin. And I have guests. I know. Isaiah's gaze was steady. Two women, one young, one with red hair, running from Hargrove. At Ezra's sharp look, he added, news travels, especially when Hargrove's offering rewards for information. How much? Enough to tempt honest men. Isaiah removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. He's got search parties combing every ranch and homestead within 50 miles. It's just a matter of time. Ezra absorbed this without visible reaction, though his grip tightened on the rifle. Come inside. You should meet them. Inside the cabin, Mackenzie emerged cautiously from the back room, revolver still in hand. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the stranger, assessment in her gaze. This is Isaiah Washington, Ezra explained. An old comrade. He brings news. Isaiah nodded to Mackenzie, his expression revealing nothing of his thoughts. Miss Wells, I presume. His eyes traveled to the locket at her throat, then back to her face. That's still safe, I hope. Mackenzie's surprise was evident. You know about this? I know it's more important than your life, Isaiah replied simply, and that if Hargrove gets his hands on it, many will die. Abigail appeared in the doorway behind Mackenzie, her arm in a sling. The resemblance was striking enough that Isaiah's composure slipped momentarily, confusion flickering across his features. This is Abigail, Mackenzie said, noticing his reaction. Hargrove wanted her. I couldn't let that happen. Isaiah studied the younger woman with an unreadable expression. No, he said finally. I don't imagine you could. He turned back to Ezra. We need to talk, all of us. Around the kitchen table with coffee steaming in chipped mugs, Isaiah outlined the situation in Sweetwater. Hargrove was in a rage, offering substantial rewards for the capture of Mackenzie and Abigail, dead or alive. More concerning were the rumors that he'd enlisted the help of the territorial marshals, claiming the women had stolen valuable property and murdered one of his men. Did you? Isaiah asked bluntly, looking at Mackenzie. Kill one of his men? Mackenzie's gaze didn't waver. No, but I would have if necessary. Isaiah nodded, accepting this. The law's looking for you too now. Makes things complicated. The law in these parts belongs to Hargrove, Ezra observed. Has for years. Not all of it. Isaiah took a slow sip of coffee. There's a federal marshal in Santa Fe who's been building a case against Hargrove. Land fraud mostly, but he'd be interested in whatever's in that locket. Mackenzie's hand moved to the silver pendant. How do you know about this? Isaiah and Ezra exchanged a glance, a silent communication born of shared history. It was Ezra who answered. Isaiah has connections, people who watch, people who listen. You mean spies, Abigail said softly, speaking for the first time since the meeting began. I mean people who haven't forgotten what happened during the war, Isaiah corrected, his tone gentle but firm. Or the promises made after. An uncomfortable silence fell, broken only when Ezra stood to refill coffee cups. The movement seemed casual, but Mackenzie noticed how he positioned himself to keep the window in view. What happened during the war? She asked, looking between the two men. Another exchange of glances. Isaiah shrugged slightly, deferring to Ezra, who remained silent for a long moment. Some debts, he said finally, are paid in blood, others in silence. He set the coffee pot down with careful precision. All you need to know is that Isaiah and I share a history, and that his information is reliable. Mackenzie sensed the wall that had risen, subjects not to be broached, questions not to be asked. She nodded, accepting the boundary for now. So what do we do if both Hargrove and the marshals are looking for us? Where can we go? North, Isaiah suggested, to Copper Ridge. There's a federal presence there investigating mining claims. People who might listen to what you know about Hargrove. It's 3 days hard ride, Ezra noted, through difficult country, and Abigail's not ready for that kind of journey. I'm stronger than I look, Abigail protested. You're healing well, Ezra acknowledged, but that wound could reopen with the kind of jostling a long ride brings. Another week of rest, minimum, before you should attempt it. We might not have another week, Mackenzie pointed out. Then we prepare, Ezra said simply, for whatever comes. The conversation shifted to practicalities, supplies, weapons, escape routes. As they talked, Mackenzie observed the easy way Isaiah and Ezra worked together, filling gaps in each other's thinking, anticipating concerns, the dynamic of men who had faced danger side by side. When the planning concluded, Isaiah excused himself to check on his horse. Abigail, tired from the tension of the meeting, retired to rest. Ezra and Mackenzie were left alone at the table, the weight of decisions pressing down on them. You trust him completely, Mackenzie observed. Isaiah. With my life, Ezra confirmed, many times over. Yet you've never mentioned him before now. Ezra's expression remained impassive. There are many things I haven't mentioned, Miss Wells, just as there are many things you haven't told me. His gaze briefly flickered to the silver chain barely visible at her neckline, where her most dangerous secret lay hidden. The challenge hung between them, neither willing to be the first to expose their vulnerabilities. Finally, Mackenzie stood, gathering empty cups. I should check on Abigail. Ezra nodded, allowing her retreat. But as she reached the doorway, he spoke again. The room at the end of the hall, the one that's always locked. He met her questioning gaze. If something happens to me, the key is in the tin on the mantel. Inside that room is everything you'll need to understand and to survive. The unexpected disclosure left Mackenzie momentarily speechless. Before she could respond, Ezra rose and left the cabin, joining Isaiah outside. Through the window, Mackenzie watched the two men talking, heads bent close together. Isaiah's hand rested briefly on Ezra's shoulder, a gesture of reassurance or farewell, she couldn't tell which. Then the older man mounted his horse and rode away, disappearing into the shimmering heat of the desert. Ezra remained standing, watching long after the rider had vanished from sight. That night, unable to sleep, Mackenzie found herself drawn to the locked room at the end of the hall. Its very existence was a question. What would a man living alone in the desert need to keep locked away? What secrets could be worth such precaution? The key in the tin on the mantel. The knowledge tempted her like forbidden fruit. She stood before the door, hand raised as if to knock, though she knew no one would answer. The wood was worn smooth from years of touch, the brass keyhole tarnished with age. Whatever lay beyond had been sealed away for a long time. It's not what you think. Ezra's voice startled her. He stood at the end of the hallway, a shadow among shadows, only his eyes catching the faint moonlight from the window. I wasn't, Mackenzie began, then stopped, honesty winning out. I was curious. Naturally. He approached slowly, his footsteps silent on the wooden floor. Locked doors invite questions. What's inside? Ezra considered her for a long moment. The past, he said finally. Mine and others. That's cryptic. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Yes. He reached past her, his arm brushing hers as he touched the door. Some ghosts are better left undisturbed, Miss Wells. The proximity sent an unexpected warmth through Mackenzie, awareness blooming of him as a man rather than simply a reluctant protector. She stepped back, creating distance. Yet you told me where to find the key, if something happens to you. Because if I die, Ezra said bluntly, you'll need what's in that room to understand why, and to protect yourself and Abigail from the same fate. The casual mention of his death chilled her. You speak as if it's inevitable. Death always is. He turned away from the door, moving back toward the main room. The only variables are when and how. Mackenzie followed him, unwilling to let the conversation end on such a fatalistic note. Is that what the war taught you? That death is the only certainty? Ezra paused, looking back at her. In the dim light, the lines of his face seemed deeper, the weight of memory evident in his eyes. The war taught me many things, Miss Wells, most of them best forgotten. He gestured toward the kitchen. Tea? The mundane offer after such portentous words almost made Mackenzie laugh, but she nodded, following him to the small kitchen. As Ezra busied himself heating water and preparing cups, she settled at the table, watching his precise movements. You never answered my question, she said after a while. About which side you fought for. No, he agreed, I didn't. He placed a steaming cup before her, then took a seat across the table. Does it matter? It might, depending on what's in that room. Ezra studied her over the rim of his cup, assessment in his gaze. What do you think is in there, Miss Wells? Confederate gold, Union secrets, the lost treasure of Montezuma? The teasing tone was so unexpected from the serious man that Mackenzie blinked in surprise. I don't know, she admitted, but it's important enough that you keep it locked away, yet accessible in case of your death. That suggests something of value, or danger. Sometimes they're the same thing. Ezra sipped his tea, his expression growing serious again. The truth, like most valuable things, is dangerous in the wrong hands, or the right ones, depending on perspective. More cryptic statements, Mackenzie observed. You're very good at saying nothing while appearing to say something profound. This drew a genuine chuckle from Ezra, the sound rusty with disuse, a skill developed through necessity. He set his cup down, the humor fading from his eyes. If you must know, I served as a surgeon with the Union Army. But that's not the whole truth, and a partial truth is often more dangerous than a lie. The admission hung between them, significant yet incomplete. Mackenzie sensed there was much more to the story, something that connected Ezra Coleman to Isaiah Washington, to Victor Hargrove, and perhaps even to the key she carried around her neck. Thank you, she said simply, for trusting me with that much. Ezra nodded, accepting her acknowledgement of the boundary he'd drawn. As they finished their tea in companionable silence, Mackenzie noticed a small tremor in his hand, the aftermath of tension, or perhaps an old war injury. You should rest, she said softly. You've done enough for us today. When she reached for his cup, their fingers brushed briefly. The contact, though fleeting, sent an unexpected warmth through her, a reminder of human connection she'd almost forgotten. For a moment, neither moved, the simple touch lingering between them. Ezra was the first to withdraw, clearing his throat slightly. Yes, I suppose we all should. But as he stood, his eyes held hers a moment longer than necessary, an unspoken question in their depths. That night, as Mackenzie lay awake listening to the desert wind, she found herself replaying that moment, wondering at the strange comfort she'd found in this isolated man's presence. Trust, she reminded herself, was luxury she couldn't afford. Yet somehow in this cabin with this damaged, honorable man, the walls she'd built were beginning to show cracks. The night wrapped around the small cabin like a blanket, a temporary shelter from the storm brewing beyond its walls. The following afternoon found Abigail in the garden, carefully watering the herbs under Ezra's watchful eye. Her wounded arm remained in a sling, but she worked diligently with her good hand, finding satisfaction in the simple task. This one smells like licorice, she observed, touching a feathery leaf plant. Fennel, Ezra identified. Good for digestion and flavoring food. The seeds are particularly useful. Abigail nodded, filing away the information. And this one? Yarrow, for stopping bleeding and reducing fever. A hint of approval colored his voice. You have a good memory. I've had to, she replied, a shadow crossing her features. Remembering things kept me safe. Knowing which men to avoid, which glasses not to serve, which songs certain patrons preferred. Ezra studied her, the intelligence in her dark eyes, the careful way she held herself despite her youth. She reminded him of someone, though he couldn't quite place the resemblance. How long have you known Miss Wells? He asked, keeping his tone conversational as he pruned a sage plant. 3 years. Affection warmed Abigail's voice. She got me the job at the saloon, playing piano instead of... She trailed off, not needing to specify the alternatives for a young woman without resources. Mac protects people. It's what she does. At considerable risk to herself, Ezra observed. Abigail looked up, a flash of defensiveness in her expression. She's braver than anyone I know, and better. I didn't suggest otherwise. Ezra held up a placating hand, merely noting that her protective instincts seemed to override self-preservation. A rare quality. The girl relaxed slightly, returning to her watering. She says the same about you, that you're a good man, risking everything for strangers. Ezra made a non-committal sound, uncomfortable with the assessment. Circumstances sometimes make decisions for us. Like the war? Abigail asked innocently. Ezra's hands stilled momentarily. The war was a different time. He straightened, gathering the pruned herbs. That's enough for today. You should rest before the heat gets worse. As they walked back to the cabin, Abigail slowed her pace, her expression turning serious. Mr. Coleman, if Hargrove's men find us, what will happen? The question asked with such direct simplicity deserved an honest answer. I'll do everything in my power to ensure your safety and Miss Wells's, Ezra said carefully. Beyond that, I can't predict. Abigail nodded, accepting this. She won't leave without me. Even if I'm not well enough to travel, you should know that. I've gathered as much. And she won't give up the key, no matter what. Abigail's voice lowered. It's her revenge. For what happened to her family. This was new information. Ezra kept his expression neutral, though his interest sharpened. What happened to her family? Abigail hesitated, realizing she'd said more than perhaps she should have. It's not my story to tell, she said finally. But Hargrove was involved. That's why she took the key. That's why we ran. Before Ezra could press further, the sound of a gunshot echoed across the desert, distant but clear. Both froze, Ezra's hand automatically moving to the revolver at his hip. Inside, he ordered, now. As they hurried toward the cabin, Mackenzie appeared in the doorway, alerted by the shot. What was that? Signal, Ezra said tersely, ushering Abigail past her. Get your things. We may need to move quickly. While Mackenzie helped Abigail gather essential supplies, Ezra climbed to the cabin's roof, using a spyglass to scan the horizon. In the distance, a thin plume of smoke rose into the clear sky, the prearranged warning sign from Isaiah or one of his contacts. Hargrove's men were closing in. Descending quickly, Ezra entered the cabin to find the women ready, small packs prepared according to his earlier instructions. Abigail looked pale but determined, Mackenzie calm and focused. How close? Mackenzie asked. Close enough for Isaiah to light the signal, Ezra replied, moving to a trunk near his bed. From it, he withdrew additional ammunition and a second revolver, which he handed to Abigail. You know how to use this? The girl nodded, checking the cylinder with practiced ease that raised questions Ezra didn't have time to ask. Mac taught me. Good, he turned to Mackenzie. There's a box canyon about 2 miles east. Defensible position, natural spring inside. Isaiah knows it. That's our fallback if we get separated. We're not leaving. Mackenzie's surprise was evident. I thought, Abigail can't ride fast or far, Ezra interrupted, and they're likely watching all the obvious escape routes. Better to hide and let them pass by, if we can. From the window he surveyed his small ranch, the home he'd built with his own hands after everything else had been taken. For 7 years, it had been his sanctuary. Now it might become his grave. The thought didn't trouble him as much as it once might have. There's a cellar beneath the barn, he continued, his mind working through contingencies. Entrance hidden under the hay. Room enough for both of you. I'll lead them away from the property, make them think you've already gone. No, Mackenzie's refusal was immediate. We're not separating, and we're not letting you sacrifice yourself. Ezra turned to face her, seeing the stubborn set of her jaw. This isn't a debate, Miss Wells. It's strategy. It's suicide, she countered, and I won't have your death on my conscience. Better mine than yours and the girls. Why does anyone have to Abigail interrupted, her voice small but steady. Why can't we just talk to them? Explain? Both adults looked at her, momentary silence falling as they registered the innocent logic of youth. It was Mackenzie who answered, her tone gentle but firm. Because men like Hargrove don't listen to explanations, Abby. They take what they want and destroy what they can't have. The girl's shoulders slumped slightly, though she nodded in understanding. Ezra found himself wanting to reassure her, to promise safety he couldn't guarantee. Instead, he returned to practicalities. We need to assume they know you're here, he said. That means we have limited options. Fighting would be foolish. They'll outnumber us. Running is risky with Abigail's injury. That leaves hiding and deception. Mackenzie considered this, then nodded reluctantly. What's your plan? I make it look like you were here but left in a hurry, Ezra explained. Create a false trail heading west, away from the canyon. While they follow that, you two hide in the cellar. After dark, if it's clear, we move to the canyon. It wasn't a perfect plan, but it was the best they had under the circumstances. As they prepared, Ezra found himself studying Mackenzie, the efficient way she checked supplies, her protective stance near Abigail, the determination that hardened her features. Whatever drove this woman was powerful indeed, and possibly worth dying for. By mid-afternoon, the trap was set. Ezra had created convincing signs of a hasty departure. Disturbed dust, discarded items, hoofprints leading westward. He'd even sacrificed one of his shirts, tearing it and leaving a scrap caught on a fence post, as if ripped during escape. Now came the waiting. The barn's hidden cellar was cramped but secure, its entrance concealed beneath a pile of hay and an old trough. Originally designed as a root cellar by the homestead's previous occupants, Ezra had expanded it after acquiring the property, creating a space that could serve as shelter during the violent storms that occasionally swept across the desert, or as now, a hiding place. Mackenzie and Abigail settled into the small space, equipped with water, food, and weapons. Before closing the entrance, Ezra paused, meeting Mackenzie's eyes in the dim light. Whatever happens, he said quietly, don't come out until after dark, even if you hear shooting, even if you hear me calling for you. It could be a trap. What will you be doing? Mackenzie asked, concern evident in her voice. Watching, waiting. Ezra's expression revealed nothing of his thoughts. If they arrive, I'll play the part of a simple rancher, annoyed at the intrusion. I've had no visitors, seen no women. And if they don't believe you? A faint smile touched Ezra's lips. Then I suppose we'll discover how well I remember my combat training. He began to close the entrance, then hesitated. The key to the locked room. It's in the coffee tin on the mantel. Remember that. Before Mackenzie could respond, he closed the hatch, arranging the hay to conceal any sign of disturbance. Then he led his horse from the barn, as if returning from a ride, and settled on the cabin porch with a book, the picture of rural contentment. Inside the cellar, Mackenzie and Abigail sat in near darkness, a single candle providing minimal light. The space was cool compared to the desert heat above, the earthen walls keeping the temperature bearable. They spoke little, conserving water and energy, listening for any sound that might indicate arrival or danger. After what seemed an eternity, the distant thunder of hoofbeats broke the silence. Abigail tensed, her hand finding Mackenzie's in the dim light. It's all right, Mackenzie whispered, though her own heart raced. Mr. Coleman knows what he's doing. Above, Ezra heard the approaching riders and deliberately remained seated, turning a page in his book with calculated nonchalance. Only the slight adjustment of his posture, ensuring access to the revolver at his hip, betrayed his awareness of potential danger. 5 riders crested the rise, approaching the cabin at a measured pace. In the lead was a tall man with a distinctive red bandana, Jenkins, Hargrove's head of security. The others were typical hired guns, hard-faced men who killed for pay without asking questions. Ezra waited until they reached the yard before looking up, affecting mild surprise. "Afternoon, gentlemen," he called, closing his book. "What brings you to my humble property?" Jenkins reined in his horse, studying Ezra with narrow-eyed suspicion. "Looking for 2 women," he said without preamble. "Fugitives, one red-haired, one younger. Seen them?" Ezra shook his head, rising from his chair with deliberate slowness. "Can't say that I have. Don't get many visitors out here, especially not women." He gestured toward the empty desert. "As you can see, not much to recommend the place." Jenkins dismounted, handing his reins to one of his companions. "Mind if we look around?" The question was a formality. He was already moving toward the cabin. "Actually, I do mind," Ezra replied, his tone hardening slightly. "This is private property. Unless you have a warrant—" "We have this," Jenkins interrupted, drawing a folded paper from his vest. "Authorization from the territorial marshal. These women are wanted for theft and murder. Aiding them would make you an accessory." Ezra accepted the paper, examining it with a show of concern. The document appeared official, complete with seal and signature, but he'd seen enough forged paperwork during the war to recognize the signs. Nevertheless, he handed it back with a nod. "Serious charges," he acknowledged. "But as I said, I haven't seen any women. Just passing through, are they? Or do they have connections in these parts?" The question was calculated. A man with nothing to hide would naturally be curious. Jenkins seemed to accept it as such, relaxing marginally. "Dancer from one of Mr. Hargrove's establishments," he explained. "Stole valuable property, killed a guard, took a young girl with her. Mr. Hargrove's ward. He's concerned for the girl's safety." "Understandable." Ezra's expression conveyed appropriate gravity. "Well, you're welcome to look around, though there's not much to see. Cabin, barn, corral. Barn. Been here alone for years." Jenkins nodded to his men, who spread out to search the property. 2 entered the cabin, while another headed for the barn. Jenkins himself remained with Ezra, studying him with the assessing gaze of a predator. "Coleman, isn't it?" he asked suddenly. "Ezra Coleman?" Ezra maintained a neutral expression, though inwardly he tensed. "That's right. Thought so. Mr. Hargrove mentioned you might be in these parts." Jenkins smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "Said you had history." "Did he?" Ezra's voice betrayed nothing. "Can't imagine why. I keep to myself." Jenkins seemed about to say more when one of his men emerged from the cabin, holding up a small hairpin. "Found this by the wash basin," he reported. "Looks like a woman's." Ezra's mind raced, calculating. The pin must have belonged to Claire, overlooked for years in some corner until the searchers disturbed it. A ghost from his past, now threatening his present. "My late wife's," he said smoothly. "She's been gone 7 years, but I still find her things occasionally." Jenkins' eyes narrowed, suspicion rekindling. "Your wife? Didn't know you were married, Coleman." "As I said, she's gone. I don't dwell on the past." The standoff might have escalated if not for the arrival of the man who'd searched the barn. "Tracks heading west," he reported. "Fresh. 2 horses, moving fast. And this." He held up a scrap of fabric, the planted evidence Ezra had left. Jenkins turned back to Ezra, reassessment in his gaze. "You sure you haven't seen anyone, Coleman? Because evidence suggests otherwise." Ezra shrugged, the picture of confusion. "I was in town yesterday, trading. Could have been anyone passing through while I was gone." For a tense moment, it seemed Jenkins might press further. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied. "We'll follow those tracks, but if I find out you're lying—" He left the threat unfinished. "I have no reason to lie," Ezra replied steadily, "and every reason to avoid trouble." With a final assessing look, Jenkins remounted his horse. "Let's move," he ordered his men. "They can't have gotten far." As the riders departed, following the false trail Ezra had created, he remained on the porch, watching until they disappeared over the western ridge. Only then did he allow himself to exhale slowly, releasing the tension that had kept his muscles coiled for action. They had bought time, but nothing more. Jenkins's recognition and the mention of Hargrove's history with Ezra suggested complications beyond the immediate danger. The past, it seemed, was not content to remain buried. In the cellar beneath the barn, Mackenzie and Abigail waited in tense silence, listening to the muffled sounds of searchers above. When heavy footsteps crossed directly overhead, Abigail squeezed Mackenzie's hand so tightly it nearly cut off circulation. But the searcher moved on, deceived by Ezra's careful preparation. As the sounds faded and silence returned, Mackenzie allowed herself a small sigh of relief. Beside her, Abigail whispered, "Do you think they believed him?" "We'll know soon enough," Mackenzie replied softly. "For now, we wait," as he instructed. The hours crawled by with agonizing slowness, the small space growing increasingly uncomfortable as the day's heat penetrated even the cool earth. Abigail dozed fitfully, her head resting on Mackenzie's shoulder. Mackenzie remained alert, the revolver Ezra had given her ready in her hand. When the cellar entrance finally opened after nightfall, both women tensed, weapons raised. Ezra's face appeared in the opening, illuminated by a lantern he held. "They're gone," he reported, offering a hand to help them out. "For now, but they'll be back when they realize the trail is false." Emerging from the cramped space, Mackenzie stretched stiff muscles, keeping her voice low despite the apparent safety. "They suspect you?" "Perhaps." Ezra's expression was troubled as he assisted Abigail from the cellar. "Jenkins recognized my name. Said Hargrove mentioned we had a history." Mackenzie's eyes sharpened with interest. "Do you? Have history with Hargrove?" Ezra's gaze slid away from hers. "It appears so, though I don't recall meeting him." The evasion was clear, but now wasn't the time to press. "We should move to the canyon tonight. It's not safe here anymore." They worked quickly in the darkness, gathering essential supplies and preparing for the journey. Ezra insisted Abigail ride his horse, while he and Mackenzie would go on foot. The canyon was close enough that the arrangement was practical, and the darkness would provide cover for their movement. As they prepared to depart, Ezra paused at his cabin door, looking back at the small home he had built. Something in his expression suggested he didn't expect to return. "Is there anything else you need to bring?" Mackenzie asked quietly, coming to stand beside him. Ezra seemed to consider the question deeply, his eyes moving to the mantel where the coffee tin sat, the one containing the key to the locked room. After a long moment, he shook his head. "No," he said finally. "Everything that matters is coming with us." The simple statement carried weight beyond its words, an acknowledgement that whatever waited in their future was more important than the sanctuary he was leaving behind. Mackenzie found herself touched by the implicit sacrifice. "Thank you," she said softly, "for all of this." Ezra looked at her then, really looked, as if seeing past the tough exterior to something beneath. "You would have done the same," he said simply, "for those who needed protection." It was perhaps the highest compliment he could have paid her, and Mackenzie accepted it with a nod, unable to find adequate words in response. They left the cabin unlocked, a final touch to the illusion that its occupant had fled in haste. In the silver moonlight, three figures, two walking, one riding, moved eastward across the desert, leaving behind safety for the uncertain shelter of stone walls and starlight. Behind them, the small ranch stood silent and empty, its secrets temporarily preserved in a locked room that held the key to mysteries none of them yet fully understood. The box canyon revealed itself like a secret whispered by the desert, narrow entrance giving way to sheltering walls that rose 50 feet on three sides, embracing a small spring that fed a pool of clear water. Ancient cottonwoods, their roots finding sustenance where none seemed possible, provided shade and concealment. It was a fortress crafted by nature, hidden from casual observation by the twisting approach that made it invisible until one was nearly upon it. Ezra led them through the entrance, just as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky. Abigail had dozed in the saddle during much of the journey, her wounded shoulder clearly paining her despite her stoic silence. Mackenzie walked beside the horse, one hand always near the girl's leg to steady her if needed. Both women showed the fatigue of their nighttime trek, but neither complained. "We'll rest here," Ezra announced, helping Abigail dismount. "The spring provides fresh water, and these walls block the worst of the wind. If Hargrove's men return to the ranch and find it empty, this will be our fallback position." "Will Isaiah know to look for us here?" Mackenzie asked, surveying their new sanctuary. Ezra nodded, unsaddling his horse. This place has significance for both of us. Something in his tone discouraged further questions. They established a simple camp beneath the largest cottonwood, using supplies Ezra had packed. As Mackenzie tended to Abigail's wound, cleaning and rebandaging it with fresh cloth, Ezra gathered firewood, dry branches fallen from the ancient trees. The small blaze he built was nearly smokeless, carefully placed to reflect heat without revealing their position. "You've done this before," Mackenzie observed, watching him work. "Hidden like this." "During the war," Ezra acknowledged, feeding another branch to the flames, "and after." "After." She caught the significance of the addition. Ezra's expression closed, the familiar wall descending. "Get some rest, Miss Wells. I'll take first watch." Despite his deflection, Mackenzie pressed gently. "We're trusting you with our lives, Mr. Coleman. It might help to know why you're so familiar with running and hiding, and why Victor Hargrove claims to know you." For a long moment, Ezra remained silent, staring into the fire as if it might offer guidance. Finally, he sighed, a sound of capitulation. "You're right," he admitted. "You deserve to know what you've walked into." He settled back against the tree trunk, his eyes still on the flames. "I told you I served as a surgeon with the Union Army. That was true. What I didn't mention was my additional role." "You were a spy," Abigail said softly, her perceptiveness surprising them both. Ezra's gaze shifted to her, reassessment in his eyes. "Yes, though we called it intelligence gathering. My medical position gave me access to Confederate camps, officers, information. I reported what I learned." "That's how you know Isaiah," Mackenzie guessed. "He worked with you." "Isaiah Washington was a freed slave who risked his life countless times carrying messages through Confederate territory," Ezra confirmed. "Braver man never lived." After the war, when promises to the freed slaves were broken one by one, he continued fighting for justice, for the rights his people had been promised. "And Hargrove?" Mackenzie prompted. Ezra's expression hardened. "Victor Hargrove was a Confederate officer, captain by the end of the war. I treated him once after Antietam, removed shrapnel from his neck. That scar he still bears." His voice turned bitter. "I should have let him bleed out on that field. The world would be better for it." "What did he do?" The question was gentle, acknowledging the pain behind his words. Ezra was silent for so long that Mackenzie thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant, as if reciting facts about someone else's life. "After the war, I married a nurse I'd worked with, Claire. We had a son, Samuel. We moved west, seeking a fresh start. I opened a small practice in a growing town." His eyes remained fixed on the fire. "What I didn't know was that Hargrove had settled in the same region. He'd acquired land, mines, influence, using methods that wouldn't bear scrutiny." Ezra paused, collecting himself. "Isaiah was still working for the government then, investigating land fraud and corruption. He contacted me, asked for help gathering evidence against Hargrove and others like him." His voice grew quieter. "I agreed, for old time's sake, for the principles we'd fought for." "Hargrove discovered you," Mackenzie concluded, the pieces falling into place. "Not directly, but he learned someone was collecting evidence, started hunting for informants, spies." Ezra's hands clenched into fists. "There was an outbreak of fever in the town. Claire and Samuel fell ill. I was treating them, and others, when Hargrove's men came to our home, supposedly looking for subversives." The pain in his voice made Mackenzie wish she hadn't asked, but it was too late to retreat. "What happened?" she whispered. "They ransacked the house while my family lay ill, claimed to find incriminating documents. When Claire protested, tried to defend our home," he swallowed hard. "They struck her, left her and Samuel without care or water for hours. By the time I returned, the fever had worsened. They both died within days." The stark tragedy hung in the air, underscored by the quiet crackling of the fire. Abigail's eyes shimmered with tears, her young heart responding to pain she was old enough to understand but too young to have grown callous toward. "I'm so sorry," Mackenzie said softly. The words were inadequate, but they were all she had to offer. Ezra acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "Hargrove denied responsibility, of course, called it a tragic misunderstanding. But I knew, and he knew I knew. His voice hardened. I confronted him, nearly killed him. Would have if Isaiah hadn't stopped me. Why did he? Mackenzie couldn't help asking. Because Isaiah understood what I didn't, that my death wouldn't bring justice, that there were larger forces at work, corruption that went beyond one man. Ezra sighed, exhaustion evident in every line of his body. So I disappeared instead, changed locations, kept moving, eventually settled here, where I thought no one would find me. Until we brought trouble to your door, Mackenzie said, regret coloring her voice. Trouble was already coming, Ezra corrected. It just found me through you. He looked up, meeting her eyes directly. Now you know my connection to Hargrove. What's yours? What's in that locket that's worth risking your life, and Abigail's? It was Mackenzie's turn to stare into the fire, gathering courage to share her own painful history. Abigail reached out, squeezing her hand in silent support. I wasn't always a saloon dancer, she began, her voice low but steady. My father was a lawyer in St. Louis. He specialized in land claims, property disputes. When the railroad began expanding west, he was hired to review titles, ensure everything was legal. A bitter smile touched her lips. He took the job seriously, too seriously. He discovered fraud, Ezra guessed. Mackenzie nodded. On a massive scale. Land stolen from Mexican grantees, from freed slaves who'd been promised homesteads, from small farmers who lacked the resources to fight back, all to benefit the railroad and its silent partners. Her eyes hardened. One of those partners was Victor Hargrove. Your father threatened to expose them. He tried to do it legally, gathered evidence, prepared a case for federal authorities. Mackenzie's hand moved to the locket at her throat. He kept copies of the most damning documents hidden. Insurance, he called it. Gave me this key and made me memorize where the safe was hidden. What happened to him? Ezra asked, though he suspected the answer. Our house burned down, with my mother and father inside. Her voice remained steady, though the pain was evident in her eyes. I was supposed to be there too, but I'd snuck out to meet a boy. Typical teenage rebellion. When I returned, there was nothing left but ashes. And Hargrove was responsible, Ezra concluded. The official report called it a tragic accident, but a week later I saw Hargrove meeting with the fire investigator, exchanging money. Mackenzie's fingers tightened around the locket. I was 17, alone, with no proof except a key to a safe I couldn't access. So I did the only thing I could. I survived. Took whatever work was available. Learned to fade into the background while watching, listening, waiting. That's how you ended up working at Hargrove's saloon, Abigail interjected softly. You were gathering intelligence, like Mr. Coleman during the war. Mackenzie smiled faintly at the comparison. Not nearly as organized, but yes, similar purpose. She turned back to Ezra. Over the years, I pieced things together, discovered where Hargrove kept the safe my father had mentioned in his private office at his main saloon. When I finally got access, I found not only my father's documents, but evidence of Hargrove's other crimes, including murders. And then you met Abigail, Ezra prompted. The younger woman spoke up. Max saw how Hargrove looked at me, the same way he looked at other girls before they disappeared. Her voice was matter-of-fact, though her hand trembled slightly in Mackenzie's. When she learned he was planning to purchase me from the saloon owner, she knew we had to run. So you took the key, the evidence, and the girl, Ezra summarized, and became Hargrove's most wanted fugitive. He'll never stop hunting us, Mackenzie acknowledged. The key is only useful with the knowledge of where the safe is, which I have, and Abigail is a witness who could testify to his other crimes. Ezra absorbed this, the parallels to his own story unmistakable. Both had lost family to Hargrove's evil. Both had sought justice, only to find themselves outmatched by the man's power and influence. Both had run, hiding their pain behind masks of practicality. We share a common enemy, he said finally, and perhaps a common purpose. Justice, Mackenzie agreed, or revenge. Sometimes they're indistinguishable. Sometimes, Ezra conceded. He rose, stretching muscles stiff from the night's journey. Rest now, I'll keep watch. We'll talk more about next steps when you've had some sleep. As Mackenzie and Abigail settled on their bedrolls, exhaustion quickly claiming them, Ezra moved to the canyon entrance, positioning himself where he could observe without being seen. The desert stretched before him, seemingly empty yet full of hidden dangers. Somewhere out there, Hargrove's men continued their search, drawing ever closer to this sanctuary. Ezra touched the scar on his neck, a habit when deep in thought. For years he had lived with the ache of loss, the burning need for vengeance, tempered only by his promise to Isaiah to wait for justice. Now these women had appeared, carrying with them the means to fulfill that promise, if they could survive long enough to use it. The symmetry felt almost predestined, as if the desert had conspired to bring together three broken souls with a single purpose. Whether that purpose would heal or destroy them remained to be seen. The day passed in cautious preparation. Ezra reinforced their defensive position, showing Mackenzie and Abigail how to use the natural features of the canyon to their advantage. Fallen logs became barricades. Loose stones were gathered for use as projectiles if ammunition ran short. Escape routes were identified and memorized. "You're preparing for a siege," Mackenzie observed as they worked. "Hope for peace, prepare for war," Ezra replied. "An old military maxim that's kept me alive more than once." Abigail, though still weakened by her wound, insisted on helping. Her nimble fingers fashioned additional bandages from spare cloth, and she prepared a stew from their limited supplies. The domestic task seemed to comfort her, providing normalcy amid uncertainty. As evening approached, Ezra took Mackenzie aside while Abigail tended the cooking fire. "There's something about the girl, Nim," he said quietly. "Something familiar that I can't quite place." Mackenzie glanced toward Abigail, her expression softening. "I've noticed you watching her, almost as if you recognize her." "It's not just her appearance, though that's part of it." Ezra frowned, searching for words. "It's her mannerisms, the way she holds herself. Reminds me of someone, but I can't recall who." "Could she be connected to your past, to the war perhaps?" Ezra shook his head. "She's too young, but there's something—" He trailed off, frustrated by the elusive memory. "She hasn't told me much about her early life," Mackenzie admitted. "I found her in a brothel in Santa Fe 3 years ago. She was 15, newly arrived. I managed to get her out before—" She didn't need to complete the thought. "All I know is that her mother was dead and her father had sold her to pay gambling debts." "Sold his own daughter?" Disgust colored Ezra's voice. "Not uncommon, sadly, especially for girls of mixed heritage." Mackenzie's eyes remained on Abigail, protective affection evident. "She has nightmares sometimes, calls out names I don't recognize, but she never talks about it when awake." Before Ezra could respond, a bird call echoed through the canyon, 3 short whistles followed by one long. His posture changed instantly, alert and ready. "What is it?" Mackenzie asked, hand moving to her revolver. "Signal," Ezra replied, already moving toward the entrance. "Isaiah." Minutes later, Isaiah Washington entered the canyon, leading a tired horse. His expression was grim as he dismounted, acknowledging the women with a nod before turning to Ezra. "They're combing the desert," he reported without preamble. "Hargrove's brought in more men, professional trackers this time, and he's offering gold for information, turning neighbor against neighbor." "How long do we have?" Ezra asked. "A day, maybe less." Isaiah removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "They found your trail leading here, but lost it in the rocky ground. They'll keep searching, widening the circle until they find this place." The news settled over them like a shroud. Mackenzie and Abigail exchanged glances, both understanding the implications. Their sanctuary was temporary, their safety an illusion soon to be shattered. "We need to move," Mackenzie said. "Tonight." Isaiah shook his head. "Too dangerous. They've got men watching all the trails, all the passes. And the girl's not strong enough for a hard ride." His dark eyes assessed Abigail's condition with experienced judgment. "So we're trapped," Abigail concluded, her young voice surprisingly steady. "Not trapped," Ezra corrected, "just facing limited options." He turned back to Isaiah. "What about Copper Ridge? Is the federal presence still there?" "For now, but Hargrove's working on that too. He's filed formal charges against Miss Wells, theft, murder, kidnapping, with enough fabricated evidence to make it stick." Mackenzie's face paled slightly. "Murder? Who am I supposed to have killed?" His head bartender, Isaiah replied. Found dead the night you disappeared. Convenient timing. I never, she began, then stopped, realizing the irrelevance of her innocence. In a system corrupted by Hargrove's influence, truth meant little. What about the U.S. Marshal you mentioned? Ezra asked. The one building a case against Hargrove. Marshal Sullivan, Isaiah confirmed. He's still in Santa Fe, still investigating, but he's under pressure too. Powerful men want his investigation shut down. A contemplative silence fell, broken only by the soft bubbling of the stew over the fire. Each person absorbed the gravity of their situation, weighing risks against increasingly narrow possibilities. It was Abigail who spoke first, surprising them all. What if we stop running? Three pairs of eyes turned to her, questioning. We've been reactive, she continued, a new confidence in her voice. Always responding to Hargrove's moves, always one step behind. What if we take the initiative instead? What are you suggesting? Mackenzie asked, a hint of caution in her tone. A trap, Abigail said simply, using me as bait. Absolutely not, Mackenzie and Ezra spoke in unison, their vehemence making Abigail smile faintly. Hear me out, she insisted. Hargrove wants me, alive presumably, or his men would have just shot me in the desert. He wants the key Mackenzie carries. And, she looked directly at Ezra, he apparently has unfinished business with you. What's your point? Ezra asked, though his tone suggested he already followed her reasoning. My point is that we have what he wants, all three pieces. If we control when and where he gets them, we control the situation. It's too dangerous, Mackenzie protested. He'd kill us all the moment he had what he wanted. Not if we ensure our insurance reaches the right people first, Abigail countered. Not if we make it clear that our deaths would trigger the release of everything Hargrove fears most. The logic was sound, if audacious. Ezra found himself reassessing the young woman, her intelligence, her courage, her strategic thinking. These were not the traits of a simple saloon pianist. She has a point, Isaiah said slowly. A controlled confrontation on our terms might be safer than continued flight, especially with the girl's injury limiting your options. Ezra nodded, considering. It would require perfect timing and a secure method of ensuring the evidence reaches Marshal Sullivan even if we don't survive. I have contacts in Santa Fe, Isaiah offered, people Hargrove doesn't know about. They could deliver the documents. We'd need copies, Mackenzie pointed out. The originals stay with us as leverage. The discussion continued as night fell, the four conspirators refining the audacious plan by firelight. It was desperate, certainly, dangerous, undoubtedly, but as options dwindled, it began to seem like their best, perhaps only chance. There's still the question of how to get Hargrove alone, Ezra noted as they worked through details. He rarely travels without his security detail. Leave that to me, Isaiah said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. I know people who've waited a long time for a chance at Hargrove. They'll create the diversion we need. As the plan took shape, Ezra found himself studying Abigail again, that nagging sense of familiarity returning. Something about her profile in the firelight, the determined set of her jaw, and then it hit him with the force of a physical blow. The resemblance he'd been struggling to place. It couldn't be coincidence. The timing, the age, even her coloring, it all fit a terrible pattern. Abigail, he said carefully, may I ask you something personal? The girl looked up, curious at his tone. Of course. Your mother, what was her name? The question clearly surprised her. Maria, she answered after a moment's hesitation. Maria Santiago. She was from New Mexico originally, near Santa Fe. A shadow crossed her features. She died when I was 12. Fever. And your father, Ezra pressed, though he suspected the answer already. Abigail's expression hardened. A white man who married her, then treated her like property, who sold me when gambling debts mounted. Her voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He never acknowledged me as his daughter publicly, too ashamed of having a half-Mexican child. His name, Ezra insisted gently. Do you remember it? Victor, Abigail said, the name clearly difficult to speak. Victor Hargrove. The revelation landed like a thunderclap, though Ezra had already guessed the truth. Mackenzie's sharp intake of breath confirmed she hadn't known this detail of Abigail's past. Isaiah's expression remained impassive, but his eyes reflected understanding. Perhaps he had suspected as well. "You're Hargrove's daughter," Ezra stated, not as a question, but as confirmation. Abigail nodded, chin raised defiantly. "By blood only, not by choice or love." "Does he know?" Mackenzie asked, still processing the revelation. "Is that why he wanted you at the saloon?" "I don't think so," Abigail replied. "He never looked at me with recognition, only that cold assessment he gives all young women. If he knew, he gave no sign." A bitter smile touched her lips. Perhaps all women looked the same to him, commodities to be used and discarded. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Their plan had just become more complex and potentially more effective. Hargrove's daughter as bait was one thing. Hargrove's daughter as accuser was something else entirely. "This changes things," Isaiah observed finally. "If Hargrove recognizes you during the confrontation, it might give us an advantage," Ezra completed the thought. "A moment of surprise, at least. Or make him more determined to silence me permanently," Abigail pointed out pragmatically. "Either way, it adds an element of unpredictability." Mackenzie moved closer to Abigail, protective instincts evident in her posture. "We don't have to do this. We can find another way." But Abigail shook her head, determination hardening her features. "No, this is right. This is fitting." She looked around at the three adults, her expression resolved. "He destroyed all your families. He abandoned mine. It's appropriate that we face him together." The symmetry was undeniable. Four souls connected by one man's evil, now united in purpose. Whether that purpose was justice or vengeance remained to be seen, but the distinction seemed increasingly academic. "Then we proceed," Ezra concluded. "Isaiah will make the necessary arrangements in Sweetwater. The rest of us will prepare here." He looked to each face in turn, measuring their resolve. "One way or another, this ends soon." As they settled in for the night, each lost in private thoughts, the desert around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the ancient landscape itself awaited the resolution of a human drama that had been building for decades. That evening, as Abigail slept deeply, exhausted from the day's planning, Mackenzie found Ezra sitting alone by the small spring that fed the canyon. The desert night had brought its customary chill, but he seemed not to notice. Lost in thought as his fingers traced the outline of a small photograph, she hesitated, unsure if she should interrupt his private moment. As she turned to leave, a twig snapped beneath her boot. "You don't have to go," Ezra said without looking up. "The night is peaceful enough for two." Mackenzie approached, settling beside him on a flat stone. In the moonlight, she could now see the photograph. Claire and Samuel, frozen in happier times. "She was beautiful," Mackenzie offered gently. "She was strong," Ezra corrected, though his tone held no rebuke. "Beautiful too, yes, but her strength was what I loved most." He tucked the photograph away. "She would have liked you." The unexpected statement caught Mackenzie off guard. "Washington, how could you possibly know that?" A faint smile touched his lips. "Claire valued honesty above all else, and courage. She'd have recognized both in you." He looked at her fully now. "I didn't want to at first see those qualities. It was easier to keep everyone at a distance." "And now?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. "Now," Ezra said slowly, "I find myself grateful that you broke into my barn." The admission carried a weight that transformed his simple words into something more significant. The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. Mackenzie found herself acutely aware of his proximity, of the shared understanding that had grown between them. More than allies against a common enemy, something she hadn't allowed herself in years. "I've spent so long running," she admitted. "I'm not sure I remember how to stay." "Perhaps," Ezra suggested quietly, "we could learn together." After. The word after hung between them, a future neither dared to fully envision, yet suddenly seemed possible. Their hands rested inches apart on the stone. Neither moved to close the distance, but neither moved away. Above them, stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to human concerns, yet somehow offering witness to this fragile connection forming in the desert's heart. 2 days later, everything was in place. Isaiah had made contact with his allies in Sweetwater, former slaves and Mexican laborers who had suffered under Hargrove's regime and were eager to assist. Through them, a message had been delivered to Hargrove himself. The fugitives were willing to negotiate. The time and location, Ezra's abandoned ranch at noon, had been specified. The simplicity was deliberate. Hargrove would assume a trap, but his arrogance would lead him to believe he could overcome it. He would come prepared, but not overly cautious. And that would be his undoing. The morning of the confrontation dawned clear and hot, the desert sky an unbroken blue that promised punishing heat by midday. In the canyon, final preparations were made in tense silence. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Positions confirmed. Contingencies reviewed. Remember, Ezra instructed as they prepared to leave their sanctuary. If something goes wrong, the priority is getting the documents to Marshal Sullivan. Everything else is secondary. Mackenzie nodded, the packet of copied evidence secure in a hidden pocket of her dress. The original documents, along with a detailed letter explaining their significance, had already been dispatched to Santa Fe via one of Isaiah's trusted contacts. Even if they all perished today, Hargrove's crimes would be exposed. "Are you ready?" she asked Abigail softly, helping the younger woman adjust the sling that still supported her wounded arm. Abigail's face was pale but composed, her dark eyes clear and focused. "Yes," she replied simply. "I've been ready for years." The ride back to the ranch was made in silence, each person absorbed in private thoughts. Isaiah led the way, his posture alert for signs of ambush or patrol. Ezra and Mackenzie flanked Abigail, protective despite knowing she was about to deliberately place herself in danger. They approached the ranch from the east, using the morning sun to obscure their arrival. The small homestead appeared unchanged, cabin, barn, corral standing in quiet abandonment under the vast sky. No horses were visible. No movement betrayed the presence of Hargrove or his men, but they would come. The bait was too tempting to resist. Ezra led them to the barn rather than the cabin, his strategy requiring enclosed space with multiple exits. Inside, shafts of sunlight pierced through gaps in the worn boards, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. The hidden cellar entrance remained concealed beneath hay and the old trough, a final retreat if all else failed. "Positions," Ezra directed, his voice low but authoritative, the voice of the officer he had once been. "Isaiah, the loft. You'll have the best view from there." Isaiah nodded, climbing the ladder to the hayloft with his rifle. From that vantage, he could cover the entire barn interior and the approach outside. "Miss Wells, behind those bales, you're our second line. If they get past me, you'll have a clear shot at anyone entering through the main door." Mackenzie took her position, revolver ready, her expression grim but determined. The past weeks had forged her into a fighter, sharp-edged and focused. Ezra found himself admiring her transformation, even as he regretted its necessity. "And Abigail," he turned to the youngest member of their group, "you'll be visible, but protected. Seated there." He indicated a wooden chair positioned in a shaft of sunlight, a deliberate spotlight. "Remember, your role is to draw attention, to be seen. Nothing more." Abigail nodded, moving to the chair. She had insisted on being part of the confrontation rather than hidden away, arguing that her presence would affect Hargrove in ways they could use. Given the revelation of her parentage, the argument had proven persuasive. "Once Hargrove enters," Ezra continued, "I'll identify myself and make our demands clear. Isaiah will cover any men who accompanied him. Our goal is to isolate Hargrove, get him to incriminate himself, and then escort him to Marshal Sullivan in Santa Fe." The plan was straightforward in theory, complex in execution. Success depended on timing, nerve, and perhaps a measure of luck. But it was a plan born of desperation, crafted by people who had run out of alternatives. "And if he refuses to cooperate?" Mackenzie asked, voicing the question they had all considered but avoided articulating. Ezra's expression hardened. "Then we ensure he can't hurt anyone else. Ever again." The implication was clear. Justice was preferable, but vengeance remained an option. None present seemed troubled by this moral flexibility, not when dealing with a man like Hargrove. As noon approached, tension mounted in the quiet barn. Each creaking board, each whisper of wind, became magnified in the strained silence. Abigail sat motionless in her chair, bathed in sunlight like an actress awaiting her cue. Mackenzie remained hidden but watchful, revolver steady in her practiced grip. Isaiah's presence in the loft was betrayed only by the occasional soft shifting of his position, and Ezra stood in the shadows near the barn's side entrance, rifle ready, mind calm with the familiar clarity of impending conflict. The sound of approaching hoofbeats broke the stillness, multiple horses moving at a measured pace. Ezra glanced up at the loft, receiving Isaiah's confirming nod. Their quarry had arrived. Voices drifted through the worn boards, men discussing strategy, positions, approach. Hargrove's cultured tones rose above the others, issuing instructions with the confidence of someone unaccustomed to disobedience. 4, maybe 5 men altogether. More than they'd hoped for, fewer than they'd feared. The barn door creaked open slowly, sunlight spilling across the threshold. A figure appeared in silhouette, tall, broad-shouldered, cautious. Jenkins, Hargrove's head of security, entered first as expected, revolver drawn. His eyes quickly found Abigail sitting alone and seemingly unprotected in the center of the barn. Confusion flickered across his features. "Clear," he called over his shoulder, though his posture remained wary. Victor Hargrove stepped into the barn, immaculate despite the desert heat, in a tailored black suit and leather gloves. Silver hair swept back from a high forehead, aquiline features composed in an expression of mild interest. Only the long scar down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar, marred the aristocratic image. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed immediately on Abigail. "The pianist," he observed, his voice revealing neither surprise nor particular interest. "Where is the Wells woman?" "She's the one I've come to see." "She'll appear when we've established terms," Ezra replied, stepping from the shadows into a position where he could be seen but not easily reached. Hargrove turned, recognition dawning slowly. "Dr. Coleman," he said, a thin smile spreading across his features. "Or should I say Lieutenant Coleman? It's been, what, 20 years? You've aged." "War and grief will do that," Ezra replied evenly. "Though you seem to have prospered, Captain Hargrove." "Indeed." Hargrove glanced around the barn, assessing. "I assume we're not alone. Your colored friend Isaiah, perhaps? Miss Wells herself?" "Assume what you like." Ezra kept his rifle trained on Hargrove's chest. "Jenkins and your men will need to leave. This conversation is private." Hargrove laughed, the sound devoid of warmth. "I think not, Doctor. I've come prepared for your tricks." He gestured, and 2 more men entered the barn, revolvers drawn. "Now let's dispense with the theatrics. Where is Mackenzie Wells, and where is my property?" "I'm here," Mackenzie announced, rising from her hiding place but keeping her revolver aimed steadily. "And what you call property is evidence of your crimes. Murder, fraud, corruption." Her posture straightened, one hand instinctively guarding the silver talisman that had become both her shield and her weapon against him. Hargrove's expression remained unperturbed. "Serious accusations from a thief and murderer. My head bartender would testify to your character, if you hadn't killed him." "I didn't kill anyone," Mackenzie retorted, "but you have, including my parents." A flicker of genuine confusion crossed Hargrove's features. "Your parents? I don't believe we've been properly introduced, Miss Wells. I certainly have no recollection of your family." "Thomas and Eleanor Wells," Mackenzie said, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Their house burned in St. Louis 7 years ago. My father was investigating your land fraud. You silenced him." Recognition dawned in Hargrove's eyes, followed by something like amusement. "Ah, the troublesome lawyer. I remember now." He shrugged slightly. "Business necessity, I'm afraid. Nothing personal." The casual dismissal of her parents' murder sent a visible tremor through Mackenzie, though her aim remained steady. "It was personal to me," she said quietly, "as was your attempt to purchase Abigail." At this, Hargrove's attention returned to the girl sitting in the shaft of sunlight. He studied her more carefully now, noting details previously overlooked. "The girl is my property, in a sense," he said smoothly, "purchased fairly from her previous employer, though I admit a certain personal interest in her education." "Is that what you call it?" Isaiah's voice rang out from the loft, causing Hargrove and his men to look up in surprise. "The same education you've provided to other young women?" The ones who disappeared after spending time at your estate? Hargrove's composure slipped momentarily, anger flashing in his eyes. Be careful, boy. Your kind should know better than to address your betters in that tone. My kind fought and died for this country, Isaiah replied evenly, while yours betrayed it, then exploited it after surrender. The standoff had reached its critical moment. Hargrove and his three men stood near the entrance, armed and increasingly agitated. Ezra, Mackenzie, and Isaiah held their positions, weapons trained on the intruders. And Abigail remained seated in her spotlight, silent and watchful. Enough of this, Hargrove snapped, his patience visibly thinning. I came for my property, the key, and the girl. I'll not be lectured by traitors and thieves. What about your own daughter? Abigail spoke for the first time, her voice clear and steady. Will you listen to her? The words landed like physical blows. Hargrove stared at Abigail, momentary confusion giving way to dawning recognition. What did you say? You heard me, Futher. Abigail rose from her chair, stepping fully into the light. Maria Santiago's daughter, the child you refused to acknowledge, the one you sold to a brothel when gambling debts mounted. Hargrove's face drained of color, his customary composure shattered. Impossible, he whispered, though his eyes betrayed recognition. Maria's child died of fever. Is that what you told yourself? Abigail's voice remained steady, though her hands trembled slightly. Or what you hoped had happened after you sold me? For a moment, when a crucial moment, Hargrove was distracted, thrown off balance by the revelation. It was the opportunity they'd planned for. Isaiah's rifle cracked from above, the bullet striking Jenkins in the shoulder, sending him stumbling backward with a cry of pain. Simultaneously, Ezra surged forward, using his rifle as a club to disarm the nearest of Hargrove's men. Chaos erupted. The remaining guard fired wildly, missing Ezra but splintering wood near Mackenzie's position. She returned fire with greater accuracy, her bullet finding the man's leg. He collapsed with a howl of pain. In the confusion, Hargrove recovered his wits, drawing a small derringer from his coat pocket. But instead of aiming at Ezra or Mackenzie, he turned the weapon toward Abigail. If you are Maria's daughter, he said, his voice cold with rage, then you're the last loose end from that unfortunate chapter of my life. Time seemed to slow. Ezra saw the weapon turn toward Abigail, recognized Hargrove's intent, and reacted without conscious thought. He lunged forward, placing himself between the girl and the gun, just as Hargrove fired. The impact of the bullet drove Ezra backward. Pain bloomed in his chest, hot and immediate. He heard Mackenzie scream, heard Isaiah's rifle crack again, heard Abigail's gasp of shock. Then he was falling, the world tilting strangely around him. Mackenzie reached him first, cradling his head as he struggled to breathe. Blood stained his shirt, spreading in an ominous circle. Ezra, she whispered, using his given name for the first time. Stay with us, please. Through dimming vision, Ezra saw Isaiah descend from the loft, moving to secure the wounded Hargrove, who clutched his shoulder where Isaiah's bullet had found its mark. The other guards were subdued or unconscious. Abigail? Ezra managed, his voice weak. I'm here, the girl replied, kneeling beside him. I'm unharmed, thanks to you. Relief washed through him, momentarily dulling the pain. He had saved her, this innocent, who reminded him so much of his own lost child. Perhaps it was enough. Perhaps this one good deed could balance the scales of his troubled life. The documents, he gasped, looking to Mackenzie. Make sure they reach Sullivan. They will, she assured him, tears streaming unchecked down her face. But you'll deliver them yourself. You're going to live, Ezra Coleman. That's an order. A faint smile touched his lips. Never was good at following orders. His gaze shifted to Isaiah, who stood nearby, concern evident in his weathered features. Old friend, watch over them. Isaiah nodded, the promise in his eyes more binding than any oath. Rest easy, Lieutenant. We'll finish what you started. Darkness was encroaching at the edges of Ezra's vision, the pain receding into a strange numbness. He thought of Claire and Samuel, wondered if they would be waiting for him, wondered if they would understand the choices he had made, the path that had led him here. Mackenzie, he whispered, focusing on her tear-streaked face with effort. The locked room. The key. I know, she soothed, stroking his hair back from his forehead. In the coffee tin. You told me. Important. Papers there. And letters. For you both. His breathing grew more labored, each word a struggle. Explains everything. Mackenzie leaned closer, one hand still pressing against the wound, while the other cradled his face. Don't you dare leave now, Ezra Coleman, she whispered fiercely. Not when I've just found something worth staying for. The confession, for that's what it was, brought a moment of clarity to his fading consciousness. With effort, he raised a bloodied hand to her cheek. Never thought I'd feel this way again, he managed. Wish we had more time. We will, she insisted, turning her face into his palm, her tears mingling with his blood. I didn't survive Hargrove all these years just to lose you now. Ezra felt cold now, despite the desert heat. His thoughts were becoming disjointed, memories floating free of their chronology. The war. Claire's smile. Samuel's laughter. The first time he'd seen Mackenzie, standing proudly despite her exhaustion, protecting Abigail. The way her eyes had softened when they sat by the spring that night, possibilities unspoken between them. Should have opened my door sooner, he murmured, the words barely audible. Glad I did. Eventually. Then darkness claimed him, and Ezra Coleman knew no more. The next days passed in fragments for Ezra, brief moments of consciousness between long stretches of darkness. Through fevered haze, he was aware of Isaiah's deep voice giving commands, of gentle hands changing bandages, of Mackenzie's constant presence by his bedside. A doctor from Copper Ridge, an old colleague Isaiah had summoned, had extracted the bullet and repaired the damage with steady hands. Lucky, the doctor had said, half an inch to the right, and not even God himself could have saved him. For weeks, Ezra hovered between life and death, his body battling infection, while Mackenzie and Abigail took turns cooling his fever with damp cloths. Meanwhile, Isaiah had traveled to Santa Fe, carrying their evidence to Marshal Sullivan. By the time Ezra fully regained consciousness, Hargrove was already in a federal cell awaiting trial, his empire crumbling as investors and allies scrambled to distance themselves from his exposed crimes. Isaiah kept his promise to watch over them. Within hours of the confrontation, he had dispatched riders to fetch the nearest doctor and to alert Marshal Sullivan. By nightfall, the small ranch had transformed into an impromptu infirmary and command post. U.S. Marshal Robert Sullivan arrived 2 days later, a stern-faced man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for incorruptibility. He moved with the careful precision of someone who'd spent decades upholding the law in a land where few respected it. His silver badge caught the lamplight as he leaned over the documents Mackenzie had safeguarded. This is more than enough, he said, examining the evidence with methodical care. Land theft, fraud, bribery of officials, and now attempted murder with multiple witnesses. He looked up at Mackenzie, who hadn't left Ezra's bedside since the doctor had finished surgery. Hargrove's days of operating above the law are over. Mackenzie's exhaustion showed in the dark circles beneath her eyes, but determination kept her voice steady. He has connections, powerful friends. Had, Sullivan corrected. Powerful men abandoned sinking ships with remarkable speed. He tapped the documents. 3 territorial judges have already been implicated by these papers. They're scrambling to save themselves, offering evidence against Hargrove in exchange for leniency. Isaiah, who had been standing by the window, turned with interest. How many others are falling? The mayor of Sweetwater, 2 county officials, a railroad executive. Sullivan listed them with grim satisfaction, like pulling a rotten thread and watching the whole garment unravel. The marshal described how Hargrove had been transported to Santa Fe under heavy guard. Word of his arrest had spread quickly, bringing forward witnesses who'd previously been too frightened to speak. Families of disappeared young women, miners who'd been forced to work in dangerous conditions, small ranchers whose land had been seized through fraudulent claims. It's as if a dam broke, Sullivan explained, accepting the coffee Abigail offered. Years of fear and silence giving way to a flood of testimony. We've assigned 3 clerks just to record all the statements. When Abigail asked tentatively about her own status, whether her connection to Hargrove would taint her in the eyes of the law, Sullivan's expression softened slightly. You're a victim, Miss Santiago, not an accomplice. The law recognizes the difference. His gaze moved to the unconscious Ezra. As for Dr. Coleman's actions, They'll be viewed as self-defense and protection of others. No charges will be filed. Over the following weeks, as Ezra fought for his life, drifting between consciousness and fever dreams, news continued to arrive from Santa Fe. Hargrove's empire crumbled with astounding speed. Properties were seized, accounts frozen, associates arrested. Men who had once trembled at the mention of his name now testified eagerly against him, each trying to secure the most favorable treatment. Jenkins proved particularly valuable to the prosecution, trading detailed knowledge of Hargrove's operations for a reduced sentence. He provided names, dates, locations of buried evidence, even a ledger recording payments to officials in the disappearance of problematic individuals. 1 month after the confrontation, Marshal Sullivan returned to the ranch, this time with formal subpoenas requesting their testimony at the upcoming trial. Ezra had regained consciousness by then, though he remained weak, his recovery slower than the doctor had hoped. "They're saying it will be the biggest trial in New Mexico Territory's history," Sullivan informed them, sitting at the kitchen table where Ezra had once performed surgery on Abigail. "Newspapers as far east as Chicago are covering it." "And the outcome?" Ezra asked, his voice still raspy from the weeks of disuse. Sullivan's expression was confident. "With your testimony and the evidence we've gathered, Hargrove will hang. The only question is how many others he'll take down with him." He studied the three of them, Ezra in his chair by the fire, Mackenzie nearby, Abigail preparing dinner. "You've done more than bring one man to justice. You've helped expose a system of corruption that's poisoned this territory for decades." The knowledge that their suffering had led to something larger than personal revenge brought a different kind of healing, not just for their bodies, but for their souls. 3 months later, a different kind of heat filled the small ranch. Not the punishing blaze of summer, but the gentle warmth of a well-tended hearth in early autumn. The cabin had been repaired, the bullet holes patched, new curtains hanging in windows once covered with cloth for concealment. Outside, the garden flourished, expanded now to include vegetables as well as medicinal herbs. A new section had been fenced for chickens, their contented clucking providing background music to the day's activities. The corral held 2 horses now, and the barn had been reinforced, its structure sounder than before. Inside the cabin, Abigail moved confidently around the kitchen, preparing dinner with practiced ease. At 18, she had blossomed in the wake of danger, finding strength she hadn't known she possessed. Her wounded shoulder had healed cleanly, leaving only a small scar as testimony to their ordeal. The front door opened, admitting Mackenzie, her arms full of firewood. "Cold front coming," she announced, depositing her burden beside the hearth. "Isaiah says we might even see frost by morning." "Good," came a voice from the small room that had been converted to a doctor's office. "The garden could use a rest." Ezra Coleman emerged, moving carefully but steadily. The bullet that had nearly claimed his life had left its mark. He would always carry pain, always move with a certain stiffness. But skilled hands and a will to live had prevailed against the odds. Those same hands now helped people throughout the region. The small sign outside the cabin, Dr. E. Coleman, physician, drew a steady stream of patients from surrounding homesteads, some paid in cash, others in produce or labor. None were turned away. Marshal Sullivan's letter arrived, Mackenzie informed him, retrieving an envelope from her pocket. "Hargrove's trial is set for next month. He wants all 3 of us to testify." Ezra nodded, accepting this news without visible reaction. And Jenkins, the others? Turned state's evidence. Apparently, Hargrove's loyal followers became considerably less loyal when facing the gallows. A grim satisfaction colored her tone. "The marshal says the case is solid. Land fraud, corruption, murder, multiple counts of each. Hargrove won't see freedom again." "Justice, then," Ezra observed, "or something approximating it." "As close as we're likely to get in this world," Mackenzie agreed. She moved to the window, looking out at the land they now shared. "Isaiah mentioned some freed families looking to settle, former slaves from Texas. He thought we might offer temporary shelter until they can establish their own homesteads." "The barn could house several families with minor modifications," Ezra noted, considering the logistics rather than questioning the principle. Their home had become a haven of sorts, first for themselves, now for others in need. "I could teach the children," Abigail suggested, looking up from her cooking. The small school she had started under the cottonwood tree now served a half-dozen local children, regardless of race or background. At least the basics: reading, writing, mathematics. The easy domesticity of the conversation belied the extraordinary journey that had brought them to this point. Three strangers, bound by common wounds, forged into a family by fire and blood and shared purpose. Those months of healing had changed more than just Ezra's physical condition. The walls he had built around himself over years of isolation had gradually fallen, brick by brick, as Mackenzie tended to his wounds. At first it was necessity, she changing bandages, helping him sit up, bringing water when fever left him parched. But necessity had evolved into something deeper, more meaningful. She remembered the night when everything shifted. Ezra had been awake, finally lucid after days of fever, moonlight casting shadows across the cabin floor. She'd been reading to him, one of his medical journals, her voice soft in the stillness. "Why did you stay?" he'd asked suddenly, interrupting her mid-sentence. "You could have left with the marshal, started over somewhere safe." Mackenzie had set the journal aside, considering her answer carefully. "At first, because I owed you a debt. You nearly died protecting us." And now, his eyes, sharper than they had been in weeks, searched her face. "Now it's because this feels like home." The admission had surprised her as much as him. Not the place, the people. His hand had found hers then, tentative at first, then sure. They hadn't needed more words. Small moments had followed, a lingering touch when passing coffee, shared glances over Abigail's enthusiastic chatter, the quiet comfort of sitting together on the porch watching the sunset. Nothing dramatic, nothing sudden, just the slow, steady growth of something neither had expected to find again in this life. Abigail had noticed, of course. Her knowing smiles and convenient excuses to leave them alone had become increasingly transparent. "You two aren't fooling anyone," she'd announced one evening, making both of them blush like schoolchildren. "And I approve, for what it's worth." It was strange how happiness could feel both foreign and familiar at once, like returning to a place you'd only dreamed about but somehow recognized. Neither of them spoke of the future in grand terms. Both had learned the fragility of such promises. But in small ways, they built it together. Mackenzie adding her books to his shelves, Ezra crafting a new rocking chair to match his own, both of them teaching Abigail what they knew best. After dinner, as twilight painted the desert in shades of lavender and gold, they gathered on the porch, a nightly ritual regardless of weather. Ezra sat in the old rocking chair, Mackenzie beside him on the bench, Abigail on the steps at their feet. The vast sky stretched above them, stars emerging one by one in the deepening blue. "I received a letter from the Pinkerton agency today," Ezra mentioned casually, though the significance was anything but. "They're establishing an office in Santa Fe, looking for operatives with specialized experience." Mackenzie raised an eyebrow, understanding the implication. "Investigating land fraud? Corporate corruption?" "Among other things." Ezra rocked slowly, contemplatively. "They specifically mentioned my name. And yours." "Both of us?" "Apparently our recent activities have attracted attention in certain circles. Isaiah may have had something to do with the recommendation." Mackenzie considered this, fingers tracing the outline of the silver keepsake against her skin. Its inner chamber now vacant, its purpose fulfilled, yet she kept it close as a memorial to justice finally served. It would mean travel, being away from home for periods of time. "Yes," Ezra's gaze moved to Abigail, "which is why we would need to discuss arrangements, as a family." The word hung in the air, significant in its casual use. They had become a family in all but legal recognition, bound by choice rather than blood, by shared purpose rather than convention. "I'm old enough to manage on my own," Abigail pointed out, though her expression revealed her appreciation of being included in the decision. "And with Isaiah nearby, we'll consider it," Mackenzie decided, "all of us, together." Silence fell, comfortable and undemanding. The desert night enfolded them, vast and ancient and indifferent to human concerns. Yet within its harsh embrace, they had found something precious. A second chance, a new beginning. Ezra reached out, his hand finding Mackenzie's in the gathering darkness. She interlaced her fingers with his, the gesture natural now after months of cautious approach, of healing both physical and emotional. When I opened my door that night, he said softly, I never imagined where it would lead. None of us did, Mackenzie replied, squeezing his hand gently. Sometimes the desert offers water where you least expect it. Abigail smiled up at them, her young face went beyond her years. And sometimes family finds you when you've stopped looking. Above them, the first stars of evening pierced the darkening sky, eternal witnesses to the small miracle of three broken souls who had found wholeness together in a place where most saw only emptiness and loss. The desert, harsh and unforgiving as it was, had become home, and in its vast silence, they had found their voices again. The desert, harsh and unforgiving as it was, had become home, and in its vast silence, they had found their voices again. 1 year to the day after Ezra had first opened his door to two desperate strangers, they gathered around a small fire in the yard. The occasion wasn't marked on any calendar, but they all remembered. Some anniversaries need no written reminder. A toast, Ezra suggested, raising his tin cup. The firelight caught the new silver strands in his hair, badges earned during a year of rebuilding and renewal. To doors opened. To keys found, Mackenzie added, her hand unconsciously touching the locket she still wore, empty now, but carried as a reminder. The trial had concluded 3 months earlier, with Hargrove sentenced to hang. She had testified with steady voice and unflinching gaze, finally closing the chapter that had begun with her parents' murder. To family made, Abigail completed, her smile reflecting the confidence she had developed. At 19 now, she had blossomed into a young woman of remarkable grace and determination. Her school had grown to 15 students, children of all backgrounds, learning together under the cottonwood trees. From the barn came the soft sounds of conversation and laughter. 3 families of freed slaves had settled temporarily on the property while building their own homesteads nearby. Isaiah visited regularly, bringing news and supplies, his network of contacts ensuring that justice, once begun, continued to spread throughout the territory. As the fire burned lower, Ezra took Mackenzie's hand and led her a few steps away into the silver pool of moonlight beyond the fire's glow. I have something for you, he said, reaching into his pocket. What he withdrew wasn't grand or elaborate, a simple silver band fashioned from a coin, polished to a soft gleam. I'm not one for formal ceremonies or ministers, but Mackenzie's breath caught. Is this what I think it is? A question, he replied, or an offer, whatever you want to call it. His voice, normally so steady, held a note of vulnerability. I've learned that life offers few second chances. This is mine, if you'll have it. She took the ring, turning it in the moonlight. Inside, she could see tiny etched letters, Desert Oath. What does it mean? She asked softly. That some promises are carved in stone, Ezra said. That some bonds, forged in the harshest conditions, never break. Mackenzie slipped the ring onto her finger, where it settled as if it had always belonged there. No further words were needed. Their journey had taught them the value of silences shared, of understanding that ran deeper than speech. From the fire, Abigail watched them with a knowing smile. Her diary entry that night would read, Today marks 1 year since we found shelter in a stranger's home. We came seeking safety for a night. We found instead a lifetime. When spring arrived, bringing wildflowers to the desert in riotous abundance, they held a simple ceremony beneath the cottonwood trees. Isaiah officiated, his deep voice carrying across the gathered friends and neighbors, a community built from the scattered pieces of broken lives. Abigail played the piano that Ezra had somehow procured and transported across miles of desert as a surprise gift for her 19th birthday. The desert witnessed it all with ancient patience, the healing of wounds both visible and hidden, the building of a home on foundations stronger than the past, the creation of a family bound by choice rather than blood. In a land where so many came to disappear, they had found themselves instead. And that, perhaps, was the greatest victory of all.